Hey everyone, welcome to the Turtle Talk Show. Today we're diving into a super interesting topic about female competition and psychology. A new female colleague joins your office. She's stunning. She dresses impeccably. Her outfits even show off her figure a bit. Try to recall the subtle reactions of the other women in the office at that moment. The exchanged glances. The quiet whispers and hidden exclusion that soon spread in the pantry. This phenomenon is incredibly common in our daily lives. We usually brush it off as simple jealousy or so-called workplace female rivalry. But is it really that simple? What if I told you this is an ancient, brutal survival law? One carved deep into human genetics, playing out right in front of you. What if that seemingly harmless cold shoulder and exclusion is actually an ultimate game? A game designed to wipe out a rival's future reproductive potential. Today we are diving deep. We will explore one of the most hidden and shocking branches of human behavioral philosophy and evolutionary psychology. I'm taking you into the dark world of female intrasexual competition. It sounds academic, but its core is incredibly grounded and absolutely brutal. Simply put, it studies how women compete within their own group. They fight to decide who gets the largest share of relative reproductive success in a massive population. To fully grasp this, we have to look at the foundational logic of evolution. What is nature's ultimate currency? In the ruthless laws of evolution, the only hard currency is reproductive success. Genes that help individuals successfully reproduce increase their frequency in the population. Therefore, any physiological mechanisms or outward behaviors tied to those genes will also become more common. So, female intrasexual competition isn't some abstract mystery. It's a precise set of behaviors forged over eons of evolution. This behavioral toolkit has one ultimate goal: to maximize an individual's relative reproductive success. Notice the key word here, relative. It's highly misunderstood. Evolution doesn't demand you birth the absolute maximum number of children humanly possible to win. Absolute numbers aren't the deciding factor in this brutal elimination game. You just need to ensure your reproduction rate and surviving offspring exceed your population's average. As long as your bloodline maintains this above-average edge across generations, your representation in the population will snowball. Eventually, you win the evolutionary game. So, the key to victory is always relative reproductive success, not absolute numbers. Once we understand this, we see two distinct winning strategies. Strategy 1 is obvious: work hard to boost your own reproductive success and pass on your genes. Strategy 2 is far more hidden and aggressive: do everything possible to suppress the reproductive success of all potential rivals. Choose either path, or both. Ultimately, they both tangibly increase your net reproductive success. This is why women's social behaviors are often far more complex than they appear. Viewing human behavior through this evolutionary lens doesn't exactly paint women in a flattering light. This leads to a question evolutionary psychologists hate answering most: how conscious is this competitive breaking behavior? Are all women consciously plotting to suppress another woman's reproductive rights? Researchers usually sigh at this question. It's an incredibly difficult blind spot to explain. You might think scientists have a perfect standard answer ready. But honestly, the true clarity of human consciousness remains a massive, unresolved mystery in academia. It varies from person to person. And on a macroevolutionary scale, it might not even matter that much. Explaining what consciousness is and its purpose is a hard philosophical and scientific problem. There's no broad consensus. But we can observe how it works regarding our evolved behavioral tendencies. Consciousness often acts like a Monday morning quarterback. It creates plausible, logical justifications after the fact for what you've already done. That's basically what our consciousness does for most daily behaviors. When you ask people why they just did something, the shocking truth is they often genuinely don't know. Classic psychology experiments prove this. Researchers secretly manipulated the information given to subjects. The subjects made decisions based on this altered data without knowing it. When asked why they made that decision, their brains immediately fabricated a reason out of thin air. The scariest part? The subjects had no idea their flawless-sounding reasoning was completely made up. So, we have to accept a counterintuitive reality. People usually have no idea why they do what they do. Most people, not just women but all of humanity, are blind to the deep drivers of their behavior. When someone walks down the street and finds a stranger attractive, they don't know the real reason. They don't know that specific facial proportions are releasing strong, hidden genetic signals. Signals implying high testosterone or estrogen levels, which directly link to strong fertility. This is a beautiful, highly efficient mating mechanism shaped over millions of years. But humans don't need to read a manual to execute it. They just look at the person and instinctively think, wow, they are hot. That's enough. They don't need to grasp the complex biochemistry and evolutionary logic behind sexual attraction. The same logic applies to our core topic today, hidden intrasexual competition. This competition applies to men too. But men play the evolutionary game entirely differently than women. For women, when they exclude, belittle, or spread rumors, their brains don't need to consciously realize the end goal. They don't need to think they are ruthlessly suppressing another woman's reproductive success. Evolution just needs to give them a strong internal urge. An urge forcing them to act that way in specific situations. Mechanistically, women don't need subjective, conscious malice to execute this. However, biology aside, we must acknowledge another reality. Women are absolutely aware of the malice and meanness in their interactions. Most women can testify to this. Almost every woman has been the victim of bullying and exclusion by other mean women at some point. So, women undeniably have the capacity to be overtly, consciously, and chillingly cruel to one another. That is an unquestionable social reality. Do they sometimes realize the true consequences of their actions? Yes, sometimes they do. Especially when viewed through specific ideological lenses, like certain feminist frameworks. Influenced by certain trends, women know exactly how their words and ideologies affect others' reproductive success. The cognitive mismatch here is that they genuinely believe this is a great thing. They see it as profound social progress. In these specific schools of thought, motherhood is redefined as oppression. Traditional marriage is deconstructed as systematic subjugation and slavery. So, if you can liberate other women from this oppression via your ideology, it's a noble cause. They might clearly know it's an ideology that objectively suppresses reproduction. But subjectively, they don't think they are acting out of malice or bad motives. Yes, many women will frankly admit to being mean, or experiencing meanness. But this awareness usually stays on a surface level. For example, she's an unbearable bitch, or I just don't like her lifestyle. Bridging the gap from emotional surface reasons to the ultimate evolutionary explanation is tough. Admitting that isolating a coworker or gossiping about her weekend was actually about suppressing her future baby-making potential. That is a massive, unbelievable mental leap. I think even victims rarely reach this deep psychological breakdown independently. Most people facing workplace exclusion won't coldly conclude, they want to suppress my reproductive rights. These rumors and social isolations are just in-game mechanics. They aren't the final win condition. This leads to a deeper question. If women don't link social exclusion to reproductive success, what are they actually competing over? Many women astutely equate this competition with a glaringly obvious metric: physical attractiveness and looks. As we all sense in real life, physical attractiveness is a massive chunk of female mate value. It directly dictates your leverage and market value in the brutal dating arena. Women know this perfectly well. How they treat other women and are treated in return often hinges on direct physical comparisons. Let's cut back to that office scene. A highly attractive new face enters the workplace or social circle. She's like a stone thrown into a calm lake. She instantly triggers subconscious alarm and even inexplicable anger in other women. People usually smooth things over by saying, "Oh, they are just jealous." But evolutionary psychology tells us this emotional jealousy masks precise survival calculations. The subtle meanness, bullying, and relational aggression aren't just about how pretty she is. It's deeply tied to how she dresses and how much skin she shows. Academia has a classic social psychology experiment on this. While the specific researchers might be Marianne Fisher or her brilliant peers, the findings are spine-chilling. They had the same woman ask female pedestrians for directions in different setups. In setup 1, she dressed conservatively, fully covered. In setup 2, she wore highly revealing, sexy clothes. The result? The exact same woman got drastically different reactions from female strangers based solely on her outfit. Why? Because the woman wearing less fabric and showing more skin subconsciously presented a highly dangerous threat. She was a potential sexual competitor. She was an assassin radiating mating threat, instantly triggering defensive alarms in other women's brains. Social exclusion becomes the perfect defense strategy here. It crushes her confidence. It makes her hesitant and self-doubting. Marginalizing her and pushing her out of the core circle indirectly lowers male interest in her. It's like a group effort to violently tear down a massive billboard that screams, "I have extremely high sexual availability." Understanding this unique female signaling mechanism is crucial to seeing human nature. Traditional society assumes women dress up beautifully and apply makeup to please men. That time-consuming effort is rarely about the male gaze. Those meticulously crafted details are precisely projected at other women. In the female world, they are decoded as strong signals of intrasexual aggression. It's a public declaration of social aggressiveness and dominance. If an already attractive woman overdresses to broadcast this signal, other women usually read it as highly negative and hostile provocation. Interestingly, if a relatively average-looking woman dresses up the same way, it's often seen positively as a sign of leadership and competence. The former carries the oppressive weight of reproductive competition, the latter just shows social capability. So, when a beautiful woman drops into a social setting with a strong halo of sexual attraction, she is an aggressive signal herself. She is basically tossing a highly oppressive gauntlet at all the women around her. Naturally, the surrounding women defend their territory with fierce, covert, defensive attacks. I wonder how many female listeners have experienced this. Have you ever intentionally dressed down or looked plain when meeting a new circle of girlfriends or starting a new office job? If you've ever sensed this hidden game, even without knowing the evolutionary theory of reproductive suppression, you've learned from experience. You know that if you show up looking overly dazzling, the other women won't be friendly. So you instinctively choose a less aggressive outfit. It's as if your environment has trained you over the years, like an AI model, into a safer, smoother behavioral pattern. This finely tuned instinct isn't just social conditioning. It's deeply rooted in our innate evolutionary programming. So how does male intrasexual competition differ so wildly from this complex female game? Isn't reproductive success the currency for men too? Why do we always pin this brutal reproductive suppression on women? The sexes have crucial differences here. The most fundamental one is the asymmetry of physiological costs. Think about this brutal historical fact. Human societies can ruthlessly send thousands of young men to die on bloody battlefields. Yet, the population can miraculously bounce back within a single generation. This exact same bottom-layer logic means men almost never evolve to use manipulative reproductive suppression on their rivals. Suppose a man successfully suppresses the reproductive success of another man or a whole group of men. Even if he convinces half the men to drop out of the gene pool, the remaining men can easily fill the reproductive void. Men don't get pregnant. Give a healthy man a 30-minute break and a glass of water, and he's ready to rejoin the reproductive battlefield. But this game plan absolutely fails for women. No rational society would send 40% to 60% of its women to be cannon fodder. If that many women die or lose their fertility, the population needs multiple generations just to slowly recover. A woman's reproductive success has a hard physiological ceiling right from the start. Therefore, male intrasexual competition is laser-focused on maximizing their own reproductive success. For a man, it's a simple, brutal 100-meter dash. Their life's race car only has a gas pedal mashed to the floor. There are no brakes installed. They just sprint down their lane as fast as possible, trying to leave more offspring than the next guy. Women's competition is also a race. But every runner spends most of their time and energy reaching out to pull back the women running next to them. They try to drag others back. They try to trip them up. The end result is that the entire pack of runners might just be jogging in place, barely moving forward. This is why relative net reproductive success is so vital for women. Even if the whole pack stalls and absolute reproductive numbers are low for everyone, it doesn't matter. As long as you can suppress others and stand at the top of the pack, you are the absolute winner of this genetic game, even with a low absolute number. So, men and women aren't even playing the same evolutionary game. This massive asymmetry means reproductive suppression is useless for men, but priceless for women. Every time a woman reproduces, it comes with exorbitant sunk costs. It's a 2-year physical contract of pregnancy and nursing. Sure, you could say she can have back-to-back babies, but the hidden opportunity costs are immense. If she fails to lock down the father of her first child, her odds of finding the next high-quality partner plummet. Her prospects of securing enough resources to raise future children become incredibly bleak. Female reproduction isn't just limited by basic biology. It's constrained by a domino effect of social consequences. Men don't face these heavy burdens. Even in modern society where courts enforce child support, having a child with an ex doesn't stop a man from starting a new relationship and having more kids. Unless a woman is ready to pay a devastating price, she doesn't have the luxury of easily hitting the reset button. A recent study on groups like basketball players showed that men exhibit more physical contact and emotional expression with their teammates than women do with their allies. It seems like a fun fact. But once you understand the underlying logic of women hitting the brakes, it all makes sense. This natural vulnerability and resource scarcity forced women to evolve incredibly complex and subtle social skills subconsciously. Men completely lack this skill set. Their brains aren't even wired to recognize or detect it. When a man walks into a new workplace with his girlfriend, she might instantly catch a female colleague's highly aggressive, subtle microexpression. The man is probably clueless, thinking everyone is super friendly. He might not even notice someone is standing there because he's too busy chatting. This perfectly explains the underlying drivers of gender behavior differences. In this survival game, only one sex has both a gas pedal and a brake pedal. The other sex is just driving blindfolded, flooring the gas. This hidden, ruthless female intrasexual competition is a fundamental organizing principle of female social behavior. It acts like an invisible hand, secretly dictating much of what women do. So how does this deep competitive psychology manifest in modern, everyday life? Look at the dating advice and relationship Bibles worshipped by millions of young women today. If you closely examine late-night talks between best friends or advice from social media influencers, you'll find a chilling truth. Evolutionary psychologists have rigorously tested this in various scenarios: when to marry, when to have kids, whether to be a stay-at-home mom or rush back to the cutthroat corporate world. Researchers took what women declared they would do as a baseline. Then they compared it to the advice they gave to hypothetical female friends or colleagues. The result was an almost ironclad rule with no exceptions: the advice women give other women is highly reproductively suppressive. They will enthusiastically persuade other women not to stay home, stressing the importance of returning to work. But deep down, they might not feel the same way for themselves. They are highly likely to urge other women to delay having kids and pour all their time into career success. They tell them to wait until they have enough wealth and status. Meanwhile, they might be quietly planning the exact opposite life path for themselves. We don't just measure this hypocrisy in cold academic labs, it's running rampant in today's mass media and pop culture. Just look at the viral article headlines exploding on social networks, and you'll see how strong this undercurrent is. For example, some articles publicly proclaim, "I cheated and it was the best thing I ever did for my marriage." Or look at Target launching a Valentine's Day sweater with massive letters reading, "Dump him." Even mainstream fashion magazines like Vogue pose jaw-dropping questions: is having a boyfriend embarrassing now? Is it a backwards, right-wing conservative behavior? These overwhelming cultural symbols all broadcast the same signal. We are witnessing a systematic devaluation and brutal deconstruction of monogamy and long-term commitment in the public sphere. This massive, anti-marriage, antinatalist social trend trickles down perfectly. It transforms into private, seemingly caring but secretly lethal advice shared one-on-one between women. If you interrogate the authors spreading these ideas, they will deploy flawless moral rhetoric. They'll self-righteously claim this advice frees women from toxic relationships. They'll say it encourages true financial and personal independence. They'll scare you with realistic statistics. Look, the divorce rate is 50%. If you're trapped at home and your marriage fails, you'll lose everything and struggle to raise kids alone. You must have your own life and irreplaceable workplace value. It sounds absolutely perfect. It carries the vibe of a positive-sum, philanthropic cause shining with humanism. It sounds like a wise older sister giving you priceless life advice, helping you fight oppressive, outdated patriarchal chains. If the women preaching this advice actually practiced what they preached, it would be fine. If there was no evidence of a massive gap between the futures women plan for themselves and the futures they dictate to others, we could relax. We could just assume women are rationally weighing the costs and benefits of relationships versus careers. To some extent, this does reflect objective reality. But that is exactly where the problem lies. Nature has never been a gentle philanthropist. When we drop this noble-sounding theory back into the brutal evolutionary sandbox of manipulative intrasexual competition, the suffocating truth surfaces. Where there is competition, there are bloody winners and total losers. In this beautifully packaged ideological battlefield, who are the real winners? The true evolutionary winners are the women in the spotlight aggressively promoting antinatalist, anti-traditional ideologies, but who quietly dodge these traps in their own lives. They never practice what they preach. And the tragic losers? The women who deeply believe these grand narratives, drink all the toxic Kool-Aid, and devoutly live their entire lives by these rules. If you suddenly feel a chill down your spine, it's because you finally see the fatal strike hidden beneath the mask of independent awakening. If every woman proposing anti-family, antinatalist ideologies strictly followed her own rules, the playing field would be perfectly fair. Everyone would be on the same starting line. no one would gain a crushing competitive advantage. But that's not the case. In this ruthless race, there are always leaders barking orders and blind followers. There are reapers and the reaped. Imagine a seasoned salesperson peddling useless snake oil. Using masterful persuasion and emotional validation, she sells it to a group of true believers. The scariest pyramid schemes don't just make people pay, they brainwash victims into voluntarily becoming the next wave of fanatical salespeople. These victims now start peddling this independence and freedom snake oil to their own best friends, genuinely believing the theory themselves. This is the foundational logic of how reproductively suppressive cultural memes and mind viruses spread like wildfire among women. Many of the people frantically promoting these ideas are victims themselves. It's in their bones and they believe it completely. But don't think their brainwashing makes them useless to the evolutionary game. From the cold perspective of genetic continuation, their surplus value is far from exhausted. Even if they practice this extreme independence, stay single through their prime childbearing years and die childless, their genes aren't totally out of the brutal tournament. If they have any blood relatives left in the world, they can still help. By tirelessly pushing this reproductive suppression ideology onto non-relative women, they objectively cripple their rivals' reproductive success. This indirectly boosts their own family's relative genetic advantage. So, even a loser destined to leave no descendants is still selected by evolution's invisible hand to be a superspreader of this mind virus. This provides a flawlessly desperate smokescreen for seemingly benevolent female advice. If you genuinely believe the ideology you preach, your arguments sound incredibly sincere. They glow with a selfless, noble aura. This explains why the most destructive dating advice in today's culture is almost always cloaked in the glamorous guise of women supporting women. Take the most classic example. You might know Alex Cooper, the host of the viral podcast Call Her Daddy. In her early episodes, she painted a hyper-promiscuous utopia for millions of young girls. She talked endlessly about enjoying casual sex, separating physical intimacy from emotion, and playing men like fiddles in your 20s without taking on any emotional responsibility. This edgy, hypermodern rhetoric sounded so cool back then. It perfectly catered to the era's zeitgeist of rebelling against constraints and chasing absolute freedom. It sounded far more progressive and avant-garde than traditional advice about managing a marriage and raising kids. The younger generation ate it up. But right after building a massive empire of fans fanatically following her hedonistic values, she suddenly went public. She revealed she had actually been secretly maintaining a highly stable long-term relationship behind the scenes. She even showed the world her romantic rose garden proposal and a giant, sparkling engagement ring. In an instant, she transformed from a rebellious wild child to a defender of traditional family values. I don't think she was plotting an evil conspiracy to destroy other women when she recorded those early shows. It was just a highly effective, viral cultural meme. At the time, she probably genuinely felt those theories fit her circle's rules. But the ultimate drama unfolded when her life trajectory inevitably pulled her toward building a family, a direction perfectly aligned with human evolutionary instincts. There was a massive tear between the values she loudly exported and her actual actions. This is the truest reflection of these seemingly avant-garde cultural leaders. Without realizing it, they became the ultimate winners of intrasexual competition. Beyond heterosexual dating advice, this theory explains another hidden, fascinating social phenomenon. Why do so many elite women at the top of the social hierarchy aggressively champion non-traditional romantic relationships? They rally behind gender identity ideologies and endorse unconventional relationship models in public. Because if you label having a boyfriend as backward, conservative, or deeply embarrassing, while simultaneously praising and encouraging intimate relationships between women, you are doing something brilliant. You are using a highly politically correct method to covertly lock down other women's reproductive pathways. It's a masterful, practically unassailable method of reproductive suppression. The reason highly radical gender ideologies take root so quickly in female-dominated industries and workplaces is simple. Deep in the subconscious, it perfectly aligns with the female biological instinct to ruthlessly suppress rivals' reproductive potential. There is a terrifying evolutionary paradox hidden here. For the vast majority of human females, reproducing the moment they reach puberty is usually a terrible, maladaptive choice for real-world survival. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, there is a genuine, urgent need for self-imposed reproductive suppression during a specific phase of a woman's life. In the old days, this instinct manifested as society and elders strictly warning young girls to stay pure and avoid casual sex. But the absurdity of modern society is that during this exact same life phase, when pregnancy needs to be suppressed, mainstream female liberation ideologies swing to the opposite extreme. They aggressively encourage young women in their early 20s to boldly engage in high-risk casual sex and hook up with any man who approaches them. They package this as absolute liberation from worldly shackles. During a phase where the risk of accidental pregnancy is high, but the ability to raise a child is low, these flag-waving opinion leaders keep adding fuel to the fire. Yet, the irony is incredibly thick. When these exact same people discuss sex within the institution of marriage, their tune changes 180 degrees. Sex, which they just hailed as freedom, suddenly becomes oppressive, unpaid labor and heavy emotional exploitation the moment it enters a stable reproductive marriage framework. They righteously condemn husbands for even asking, framing marriage as the root of all evil that strangles female freedom. You see? When you're sleeping around with zero security, you're a warrior for freedom. When you're creating life in a stable relationship, you're an oppressed slave. This isn't just a massive logical disconnect. It's a colossal lie meticulously woven to cut off the reproductive escape routes of competitors. When a woman wants to use manipulative tactics to send confusing signals to rivals, the most effective and dangerous way is to perform it herself. She has to act like she truly lives by this philosophy. Any deceptive signal needs to carry a cost to be believable. She has to inflict a degree of harm on herself to completely fool the rivals watching from the shadows, tricking them into harming themselves even more. So, when women engage in this manipulative signaling, they are essentially dancing blindfolded in a highly dangerous minefield. They have to painfully balance a delicate cost-benefit matrix. One wrong step and they fall into the abyss. And some overly clever signalers make fatal miscalculations when weighing these odds. They are blindly driven by the evolutionary mechanism to send costly signals, but they fail to control the heat. As a result, they go much too far down the path of self-harm, blowing past their own limits. They don't become the final winners of this zero-sum game. Instead, they personally destroy any chance of leaving a biological trace on this planet. This brings us to the most bizarre, yet very real extreme phenomenon in modern society, the rising number of young women choosing permanent sterilization. When naive girls in their early 20s march into operating rooms, demanding doctors tie or even remove their fallopian tubes, they naively think they are receiving a lifetime pass to absolute freedom. In certain modern cultural contexts, this is hailed as the ultimate declaration of independence. They can't wait to post this heroic act on social media. They loudly broadcast that they never have to worry about failed contraception again and will never be trapped by the so-called shackles of motherhood. This leads to a spine-chilling real-life case. One girl even had her removed fallopian tubes encased in clear resin to make a necklace. She treated her severed organs like a glorious trophy, proudly wearing it around her neck and bragging to everyone that it was her most loyal friend. This profoundly absurd self-glorification is the absolute peak of the manipulative evolutionary signaling we discussed. To prove her dedication to opting out of reproductive competition to her female rivals, she paid a devastating, irreversible physiological price. In the context of evolutionary psychology, this is coldly defined as a catastrophic, massive own goal. The ancient psychological mechanisms designed to make women send competitive signals never evolved the foresight to predict or prevent this kind of extreme self-destruction. The primal source code of genetics only knows how to make you blindly follow trends and compete over who is more independent. It never evolved a braking system to handle permanent sterilization brought about by modern medicine. The result? These girls, originally just trying to gain social capital in intrasexual competition, permanently delete themselves from a genetic game that has been running for millions of years. This isn't just a dry academic theory. It's causing countless heartbreaking personal tragedies in real life. If you trace the medical history of fallopian tube removal, you'll see it was never invented to provide permanent birth control for young girls. It was originally meant to prevent ovarian cancer. Since ovarian cancer is hard to detect early, many postmenopausal women choose to remove their tubes to eliminate the risk. But once this medical tech was hijacked by the extreme liberal ideologies of the younger generation, it devolved into a highly dangerous social tool. I specifically looked up the heavily concealed data on this. I found a deeply ironic and chilling statistical fact. Among young women who undergo tubal ligation or removal, a staggering 15% to 30% spend their later years desperately asking how to reverse the surgery. Now, women who had their tubes removed to prevent ovarian cancer after menopause absolutely never seek reversal surgery. So this massive demographic of regretful women consists almost entirely of those young girls who were brainwashed by extreme ideologies into thinking they would never want kids. Imagine them in their late 30s or early 40s. They watch everyone around them building families while they face permanent isolation. The crushing regret and despair that hits them in the dead of night is brutal. They thought they were incredibly woke, independent women. Instead, they unwittingly became the perfect sacrificial lambs for someone else's competitive strategy. The renowned scholar Louise Perry precisely nailed the massive lie hiding behind this behavior packaged as female liberation. As this ideological wave has dragged on, we now have enough long-term data to observe women who have aged out of their reproductive years. Massive amounts of cold, hard data show that women who were encouraged to embrace casual sex and cut off all long-term commitments are often deeply unhappy in their later years. In their youth, they wore their wild, single lifestyle as a badge of freedom. But ultimately, they realized they missed a critically important boat in life. In stark contrast, whether looking at subjective reports of life satisfaction or objective metrics of mental health, women who have stable marriages and raise children completely crush single, childless women in happiness indices. So, when we talk about this reproductive suppression strategy, it's not just ruthlessly wiping out a genetic bloodline on a macro level. On a micro level, it tangibly destroys the happy lives countless women could have had. It's a brilliant but incredibly vicious combo attack. But if you think female intrasexual competition stops at talking each other out of having kids, you're painfully naive. To entirely secure their competitive advantage, this hidden game extends its deadly tentacles into another seemingly unrelated area, the systematic suppression of men. This brings us to the most covert and least understood tactic of female intrasexual competition, the explosive rise of the so-called toxic masculinity cultural industry in recent years. In mainstream narratives, we assume critiquing toxic masculinity is about protecting women from harm and fighting the patriarchy. Places like Australia and the UK are even teaching young boys in schools not to be toxic. But if we put on our evolutionary psychology X-ray glasses and re-examine this, you'll be shocked. Men are actually just pathetic collateral damage in this massive crusade. The real crosshairs of this theory have always been firmly locked on the female demographic itself. Its core objective is to utterly destroy women's normal mate selection preferences. Why? Because when you carefully deconstruct the so-called male vices labeled as toxic, you'll find most of them are actually incredibly crucial, high-quality male mating signals honed over evolution. Take social dominance, for example, or the moderate aggression and competitive drive shown when protecting territory and providing resources. Throughout human evolutionary history, a man who could dominate a brutal environment and offer strong protection was the ultimate high-value dream mate for women. But today, these premium signals that broadcast core male competitiveness are entirely demonized by public opinion. Even benevolent sexism, the traditional desire to proactively protect and care for women, is mercilessly attacked as condescending discrimination. This overwhelming ideological brainwashing has completely stripped men of the effective ways they use to signal their mate quality to women. Demonstrating social dominance and strong leadership is an expensive signal. It takes massive effort. You have to actually be capable and ambitious to pull it off. But displaying non-aggressive submission and so-called harmlessness is an incredibly cheap signal. Any cowardly, incompetent man can easily fake being a docile, nice guy. This has caused the signaling system of the entire dating market to crash. It's like a broken traffic light at an intersection, just flashing rainbow colors. You don't know whether to stop or go. Women have lost their reliable metrics for filtering high-quality men. To prove they aren't those aggressive, toxic men, more and more men are forced to adopt a highly submissive beta test behavioral model. This is the trendy golden retriever boyfriend or soft boy route. Meanwhile, swept up by bad advice from friends and media brainwashing, women are forced to view naturally attractive masculine traits as glaring red flags to run away from. They force themselves to date these incredibly docile, entirely passive men just to prove their mate selection is politically correct. But the subconscious, evolved over millions of years, cannot be easily tricked by a few viral internet articles. Their rational minds desperately try to convince them, this man is safe, he listens. But their biological instincts fiercely reject such uncompetitive partners. This is exactly why we see more and more of these new age relationships fizzling out or ending in disaster. Fundamentally, these women are forcing themselves to tie the knot with men who absolutely cannot trigger their primal sexual attraction. When these women find the relationship tastes like cardboard and lacks any passion, they inevitably dump the guy and try to re-enter the dating market to find a higher quality partner. But having wasted so much time on bad advice in their youth, they struggle to find truly high-quality men willing to offer long-term commitment. So they get stuck in an endless loop with men they don't truly desire, ultimately missing the golden window to build a stable family. And that is exactly the flawless endgame the elite women at the top of the food chain want to see. And what about the desperate situation of the men treated as collateral damage in all this? Terrified by the looming threat of false accusations and the extreme anxiety of accidentally crossing a legal line, men are adopting the safest strategy available, lying flat and checking out completely. For inexperienced young boys, the world has become incomprehensible and hyper-dangerous. They can't even tell the difference between normal, clumsy courting and strictly penalized sexual harassment. In today's unforgiving, zero-tolerance public climate, even the slightest attempt to advance a relationship, or emotionally pulling away after a rejection, can be blown out of proportion. It gets slapped with terrifying labels like emotional manipulation or coercion. This creates a bizarre social deadlock. The so-called good guys who actually respect women's boundaries are terrified by these rules and quit the mating game entirely. Meanwhile, the actual predators who ignore all boundaries anyway just laugh at the warnings and keep wreaking havoc in the dating scene. It's like locking heavy chains on all the good men, leaving the entire flock of sheep completely defenseless against the most cunning, starving wolves. I clearly remember a perfectly illustrative incident a few years ago. I was at a pub in London with a 21-year-old friend. A few nice-looking young women were standing by the bar. I half-joked to him, "Let's go say hi, I'm bored hanging out with you." The 21-year-old looked at me with absolute terror, as if I had just suggested we murder those girls and sink their bodies in a lake. He deadpanned that he had been repeatedly warned never, under any circumstances, to cold approach a woman in public. His response blew my mind. When I was in college, before smartphones even existed, approaching people in public was practically the only way to meet the opposite sex. Now, this totally normal courtship instinct has been forcibly demonized into a highly dangerous taboo. This has created a hell mode difficulty setting for young men. They are terrified of being publicly shamed online and having their reputations destroyed. So, their most rational choice is to voluntarily withdraw from this malicious dating market altogether. But here comes the most ironic plot twist in this absurd script. Women successfully used public opinion to nuke the traditional model of male pursuit, making men avoid approaching them like the plague. But tragically, women's own ancient mate selection instincts haven't evolved an inch to keep up with this social upheaval. Highly authoritative survey data shows that even today, a staggering 86% of women still stubbornly, deeply expect the man to make the first move. It's like you personally blew up the only bridge to the other side, yet you stubbornly stand on the bank, waiting for the other person to swim across the raging river to pick you up. At this point, you must have a sharp question. If this strategy is so destructive, aren't the elite women who started it afraid of playing with fire? Won't they shoot themselves in the foot? After all, when the entire society's dating environment becomes this toxic, won't they become victims too? This is a profound question. It touches on the cold, exquisite, foundational mechanics of the entire reproductive suppression strategy. We have to understand that whether it's devaluing motherhood, deconstructing marriage, or demonizing men who could have been great husbands, all these dizzying social phenomena merge into one massive flood. This flood forcibly creates a social environment that is highly hostile and incredibly dangerous for reproduction. The certainties and unspoken rules that men and women once used to safely navigate romance are thrown out the window. Yes, this highly toxic environment indiscriminately affects everyone negatively. But the cruelty of evolution is that it is never absolutely fair. A massive blizzard sweeping across the land will inevitably freeze countless people to death. But for the top elites who are already wrapped in thick mink coats, they'll just feel a little chilly. If you sit at the absolute apex of the reproductive pyramid, possessing sky-high mate value and flawless attractiveness, you can afford to recklessly try crazy social experiments. For example, you can lead the charge in getting a minimalist pixie cut that, in secular eyes, massively reduces traditional feminine appeal. For you, even if that haircut slightly dings your attractiveness, you're still a dazzling beauty. Hordes of high-quality men will still flock to you. But if you package this highly anti-traditional aesthetic as high fashion and aggressively brainwash average-looking women at the bottom to blindly copy it, it's a catastrophic blow to their competitiveness in the dating market. This brutal leverage principle applies perfectly to all the so-called independent, free female ideologies we discussed today. When you constantly raise the barrier to reproduction and make the survival environment brutally harsh, the average people at the bottom of the pyramid get ruthlessly eliminated in droves. They either miss their prime mating window because they fell for the casual sex brainwashing when they most needed a stable relationship. Or they blindly believe they can easily juggle a career and a family at 40, ultimately ending up completely alone. The only people who can successfully reproduce in this highly antinatalist, hostile environment are the top-tier winners who already held the highest reproductive chips. It's like an intensely hyper-competitive marathon. The runner in first place deliberately throws out choking smoke grenades and countless roadblocks, slowing everyone down. Sure, the average time for the whole race plummets. Many won't even finish. But as long as she is still running in the front, she remains the absolute monarch of this genetic game. Even if countless rivals behind her collapse in a pool of blood from exhaustion or getting lost, it doesn't stop her from wearing the ultimate crown of victory. But if we zoom out to the level of human civilization to examine this mechanism, you might think the evolutionary genes are too short-sighted. After all, if the entire society's birth rate drops below replacement levels, causing the civilization to utterly collapse, won't the descendants of these elite women just be scavenging in the ruins too? Isn't nature smart enough to foresee this tragic ending and patch the human code? The reality is, evolution has absolutely no foresight. It's an utterly blind watchmaker. It only cares about immediate, localized absolute gains. If a population gets trapped in a highly hyper-competitive local optimum, evolution has no ability to course-correct, even if this behavior ultimately drives the entire species to extinction. But here is where the entire theory of evolutionary psychology delivers its most mind-blowing ultimate twist. When a civilization nears the edge of collapse due to this insane reproductive suppression, the bloodlines of the winners don't actually turn to ash along with the society. On the contrary, the tiny fraction of elite bloodlines still at the table at the bitter end will become the founder population for the rise of the next brand new society. It's like a wildly evil and brutal game of musical chairs. As the music stops round after round, countless genetic bloodlines go extinct because they couldn't grab a chair. If you are an elite player with a massive advantage in this game, and you sharply sense the music is about to stop completely, what do? You absolutely do not want this brutal game to drag on any longer. Because as long as the game continues, you still have a microscopic risk of being eliminated in the next round. What you crave most is to personally end the game immediately, ensuring the eliminated losers never have a chance to flip the board. So, when female intrasexual competition reaches this white-hot extreme, we see various acceleration signals of civilizational collapse on a societal level. The cost of sex plummets. The entire culture becomes incredibly vulgar. The institution of marriage totters. Birth rates experience a terrifying, cliff-like freefall. All these surface-level social crises are actually clear signals that the top winners are frantically slamming the social accelerator to fight for the last few chairs. Because once you successfully survive the Great Collapse and become one of the pitifully few founders of the new society, your genes' representation in this new world will explode exponentially. You might go from being 1 in 10,000 in the old society to 1 in 50 in the new one. This is the fundamental reason why the winners maintain this brutal mechanism, even at the risk of civilizational destruction. This is also why I think the famous scholar Helen Andrews, when observing female workplace behavior, accurately saw the phenomenon but completely misidentified the root cause. She naively thought that the changes brought about when women dominate institutions are just a misguided projection of maternal instincts. But this rhetoric doesn't hold water. When we use the ultimate laws of evolution to examine the workplace cultures completely reshaped by women, the truth is usually ice-cold. The reason women systematically dismantle elite meritocracy in these historically efficiency-driven institutions, making them extremely mediocre and inefficient, is absolutely not some social reform radiating maternal warmth. It is a highly explicit and utterly cold-blooded institutional demolition operation. It's the systematic destruction they carry out to accelerate the collapse of the old world, subconsciously realizing the game of musical chairs is about to end. This also debunks the highly popular and politically correct evolutionary mismatch theory in academia. Many people love using a very clever, lazy thinking method. They blame all the incomprehensible, crazy behaviors we see in modern society entirely on sudden environmental changes. They casually say, "Oh, it's just because we have smartphones, the internet and birth control pills now, so ancient human genes have short-circuited in modern society." But Dr. Danielle Sulikowski astutely points out that this cheap cop-out excuse doesn't hold up. Because this incredibly complex modern world we live in didn't just pop out of a rock. It is the extended phenotype built step by step over eons by our incredibly complex evolutionary psychology and biological instincts. The reason the world has become this seemingly crazy and absurd place today is precisely because our deep-seated evolutionary mechanisms chose to make it this way under specific conditions. Reproductive suppression, crashing birth rates, the cyclical reincarnation of civilizations, none of this is a random glitch in a failing system. It is the exact, true objective this massive system was designed to achieve. It is a cold, tirelessly running piece of ultimate code buried deep in human DNA. Only in resource-scarce, dangerous ancient tribes did women pour all their energy solely into reproduction. Once society becomes wealthy and safe, the elite women who control surplus resources are no longer satisfied with merely increasing their absolute number of descendants. They convert massive social resources into lethal weapons to ruthlessly suppress their rivals, kicking off this fated cycle of civilization rising to its peak and then collapsing. Today, through a sharp and paradigm-shifting evolutionary lens, we've peeled back a tiny corner of the incredibly glamorous moral camouflage covering human society. We saw the chilling, brutal gears of female intrasexual competition. And we felt the powerlessness of being unknowingly controlled by this hidden program. This is absolutely not a comfortable, pleasant, or light-hearted topic. It's practically guaranteed to attract furious insults and boycotts. But only when we have the courage to stare directly into these icy truths hidden in the darkest nights of human nature can we truly understand the underlying code of how civilization runs. In this modern society seemingly guided by free will, everyone is actually unknowingly playing a role written long ago in the evolutionary script. Whether it's the fanatical followers brainwashed by ideology to voluntarily give up reproduction, the confused men ruthlessly marginalized in the dating market, or the behind-the-scenes winners who ultimately survive the great crash to rule the new world, it's all part of nature's precise calculations. Facing such awe-inspiring evolutionary power, we might not easily change the most primal urges planted in our brains by our genes. But at least the next time you hear those inflammatory slogans in daily life, or see those wildly anti-traditional social anomalies, you'll have an extra filter of scrutiny in your mind. You will no longer easily become a pathetic pawn on someone else's evolutionary sandbox. This is Turtle Talk Show. Thanks for liking and subscribing. See you next time.